Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 1 Water Episode 19, Siege of the North Part 1. So I will be splitting up all the two and multi-parter episodes into individual episodes, just so I can give them each episode the focus that they need, because I do think that with these kind of multi-part episodes, the fandom, pretty much everyone does tend to focus on like the big stuff that happens at the end, and maybe some of the setup stuff in the earlier episodes tends to get a little bit forgotten. So I'll be doing 20 tomorrow, just so I'll make an effort with the multi-part episodes to kind of record the parts of those episodes pretty close together, just so you guys aren't waiting too long for them. But yeah, this is a DR movie animated episode, which is I found pretty interesting in that they actually I have to watch it again, but I do believe JM Animation do episode 20, so that they actually have like the different animation studios do each part of the finale. But yeah, just the fact that the secondary studio actually got to do a part of the book one finale is interesting. But yeah, some pretty interesting things in this episode. It is overall a really good episode. Not really many problems. I'll get into some of the spirit stuff a little bit later on, and kind of, I wouldn't say issues that I have with it, but just like that Avatar's never been the most clear, Avatar The Last Airbender specifically, has never been the most clear about a lot of the spirit stuff that it brings up, and I'll talk about that a bit later on. But the first big thing we get here is that obviously a decent amount of time has passed. I don't really know how much. I assume it has to be a couple of weeks, just because Palku says, you know, you've advanced really quickly. But you'd almost think it has to be like a month or two or something like that, given that Katara basically goes from self-trained beginner to more or less master within this time that's happened here. Similarly with Aang is also more or less, you know, minus a couple of like subtle things that Katara ends up teaching him as we go on. He's more or less become a master waterbender at this point as well. Though the big thing they say is that Aang is talented, but he's kind of unfocused, whereas Katara has been like working so hard on all of her bending. They don't really establish, you know, like that she's continued her healing training, but obviously that's implied to have happened in the background as well. We also get little bits and pieces of Yue and Sokka's relationship as they kind of grow closer together, and Yue continues to kind of want to kind of pursue a relationship with Sokka, because she obviously isn't the biggest fan of Han and who she's actually arranged to be married to, but she always has these kind of moments where she's like, no, I can't keep doing this, I'm marrying someone else, I have to back off. So it's an interesting position that she's put in, and obviously kind of has Sokka in a quite confused position as well, especially when we actually meet Han as a character and we see that, yeah, he's probably one of the most like dislikable characters, not because he's like a villain or anything like that, but just in terms of like his personality. You really do not like this guy, which is interesting that they set up in this episode. It's one of the only times in Avatar where they do this. Chief Arnook says as they're preparing for war, they obviously get the news that the Fire Nation is coming. Chief Arnook says like, some of these faces are going to vanish from our tribe. And we get cut to 3 characters in this cut. We get Yue, Han, and Pakku. So the implication being that at least one of these characters is going to die, but based on what Arnook says, faces 2 of these 3 characters are going to die. So we know Pakku ends up surviving this whole thing. He's still alive in the comics right now in terms of Avatar stuff. Yue obviously technically, you know, dies as a human, but basically is kind of reborn as a spirit. Basically, she becomes the new moon spirit. Han, obviously in the next episode we'll see, more or less is gone because he ends up kind of missing the assassination attempt on Zhao and kind of falls either from that height onto the front of Zhao's ship, or just into the water and is never picked up again. So the implication seems to be that like Han more or less is killed, though they don't really draw much attention to it. So in the comments let me know if you think Han is killed, and just in general what your thoughts are on the fact that they kind of did that setup thing of like faces will vanish from our tribe, and they really clearly show you 3 characters. But I like how they actually get to the point of like knowing that the Fire Nation is coming, in that Yue and Sokka have this really nice moment where he brings her out for a ride on Appa, and when they're out there, the snow begins to basically turn into black snow, and Sokka immediately knows what this is. This is caused by the Fire Nation machinery, obviously having an impact on the snow with the soot, and he knows immediately that it means an attack is coming, and because it's so heavy, a big attack, and he's kind of one of the main ones to warn the Northern Water Tribe that there's actually an attack coming. So that was pretty cool. And we get to see the full extent of just how big this fleet is that's actually coming, because obviously Aang is one of the first persons out there to kind of get the battle started, and we see later on that he is basically taken out, implied, a dozen, so around 12, 13 ships, but it hasn't really made a dent at all in the kind of overall fleet. So it shows Aang's power that he's able to do that. Like him and Appa basically alone were able to take out 10, 12 ships. And that it is one of the biggest displays so far of like Aang is actually just a really good fighter when he really sets his mind to actually kind of being offensive and trying to take out things, that he can actually do it quite well with some pretty clever tactics. We see also a few other ones. The Fire Nation, I suppose, military strategy here. Obviously, Zhao has Iroh on board as his kind of advisor, but Iroh's really more playing the role of kind of keeping Zuko's secret on board. But he is giving Zhao good advice here, in that, we get this moment where like Zhao's like, I won't let this attack be a failure like your failure at Ba Sing Se. And obviously this is an episode that heavily hints towards the fact that, I don't think they've said it just yet, but that Lu Ten did die at Ba Sing Se. I think it takes until Zuko alone for that reveal to fully come out, but the fact that we mentioned the failed siege of Ba Sing Se, and it really clearly being a moment for Iroh where his kind of mind changed on certain things, and then what Iroh says to Zuko later on in this episode of just like, ever since my son died, I consider you my own. That's a really, really emotional moment later on, as Iroh kind of has to give Zuko his last piece of advice before Zuko goes in this really dangerous insertion mission into the Northern Water Tribe on his own to try and capture Aang. It shows his utter desperation that this is what he's forced to do to continue his mission, that Zuko has to go on this crazy mission. He's undercover on Zhao's ship. All he can do is just on his own swim in underwater canals basically to get into the Water Tribe. It's utterly desperate, and so it's part of the reason why Iroh, obviously much later on in the series, in the finale basically for book 2, gets kind of angry at Zuko and cites this moment as did this not show you anything, that the amount of desperation moves you made to try and capture him. One of the big things we get here is that Iroh urges Zhao to stop fighting the Water Tribe while the moon is up. Basically, as soon as it goes towards nighttime and the moon is more present in the sky, they should stop fighting. And Zhao reveals that he's actually really aware of the moon problem and he has a plan to stop it. And this episode is the one that really clearly presents this idea to us that basically the moon empowers waterbenders. They're more powerful when the moon is up, and they very much hint that the full moon is this very special time for waterbenders. And then the sun rising is a big moment for firebenders. Now, admittedly, it's one of these things that's brought up here and then more or less forgotten for the rest of the series. In the sense of they don't often use the idea of oh, it's daytime, firebenders are more powerful, or oh, it's nighttime, waterbenders are more powerful, outside of the fact that the full moon activates bloodbending, and then, just stuff around what is active and isn't active when the full moon is on. But they never really make a distinction of power levels during the daytime versus nighttime for fire and waterbenders pretty much after this episode. They obviously make heavy allusions later on in the series to the sun being very important for firebenders with the ancient sun warriors. And if the moon has a spirit, does the sun have a spirit? I think that's kind of part of what's kind of unexplored in Avatar. here, in that UA kind of gives us a little bit of a lesson here and says that, you know, basically from legends go, the moon was the first waterbender, and humans learned to do waterbending from the push and pull of the tides, and then the spirit of ocean, which is the one that's basically side by side with the moon, basically grants us life, which they obviously explain that as a power that the ocean spirit has, is the ability to basically give some of its life force to a human to kind of, I wouldn't say like revive them, but kind of give them an extra boost of kind of like life energy, or just like chi, or whatever way you want to call it. It's a bit weird that the ocean spirit has this kind of crazy revival powers. It ultimately, I would say, is probably somehow linked to the whole spirit water thing. In that, like, obviously they pretty much have to establish that the spirit water that Katara uses to heal Aang at the end of book 2 is more or less related to the ocean spirit and the ocean spirit's power, but still a little weird that they kind of just have the ocean spirit and this be its power. And then the moon is the one that has all the waterbending impacts. And it's so weird because, like, obviously this is getting into some of the like lore stuff that I covered in some of my more complicated videos, of just like the idea, like, okay, so this fish is the moon spirit in physical mortal form, but its power is applied to this giant rock that orbits the earth, and that is what gives waterbenders the ability to waterbend. And without that, and like, if you kill that spirit, one whole bending element is turned off. It's so kind of weird when you think about it, in that, like, that's not the case for basically any other element. I assume the implication is that if the sun was ever put out somehow, or the sun spirit, if there is one, was ever killed, that firebenders would also fully lose their power to bend, in the same way the eclipse, I suppose both versions of an eclipse take away one and the other bending. But it's weird that, like, does that mean it's possible to, like, somehow, like, kill some form of a, like, spirit of, like, the ground or earth and just eliminate earthbending entirely, or spirit of the wind and do that? This is something they probably should at one point get into, in that, is it just that waterbending happens to be a kind of special one, in that it has a spirit that directly relates to the bending discipline and the fact that humans learn from the moon and the action that had on the planet, versus the other ones kind of learning from an animal that kind of had a similar ability? Or, as I just kind of theorized there, is it more of a case of, like, no, there is actually a spirit that fundamentally allows each of the elements to happen, and if that spirit is ever killed or gone, that element just doesn't do anything anymore. And I think that's part of why, like, the Avatar spirit stuff just seems so different than the Korra stuff, in that it's just so vague and, like, barely mentioned that they're almost afraid to give you any information. It's part of why I like Korra so much in terms of how it approaches spirits, in that it's a little bit more open about just the information. When I feel like spirits are ultimately such a big part of the universe, you can't just do the thing of, like, oh, we never need to know about spirits because we have to keep stuff a mystery. I think you kind of have to tell us some stuff about them, and Avatar is a bit overly vague. We'll get into it more in the second episode, because, again, even the stuff with Ko is a bit weird. But we'll get into it. Just, I suppose, just to sum it up, I think Avatar's problem is probably that every spirit we meet in Avatar is established to be a notable and, like, special power, and an especially powerful spirit. Like, we don't meet any, like, normal spirits for the most part in Avatar. I suppose the Painted Lady is probably the closest you come to just, like, a standard power spirit. But that's the kind of issue, and then Korra introduces the fact that, like, there are actually just normal spirits, and then there are also, like, more powerful ones. But what else do we have here? Han and Sokka, obviously, over the course of the episode, end up kind of coming to blows, basically because Sokka is kind of defending Yue's kind of honor, because he, as much as he's kind of going for the relationship with Yue, is kind of using it more of a way to get himself more power within the tribe, and so that obviously puts it kind of annoys Sokka because he feels that he and her actually have just a good connection. The reveal here is that part of the big mission here is that the best warriors are going to go on this assassination mission to take out Zhao, the leader of the opposing forces. And Sokka, because he attacked Han, is taking off the mission, and he is basically then appointed later on by Chief Arnook to guard Yue for the rest of the kind of battle that's taking place, which I suppose speaks to how much Arnook respects Sokka despite not knowing him all that well, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, again, we see more of like Zuko's desperation as like he has to follow animals to go underwater, and nearly gets himself killed here, drowning, but uses the whole breath of fire and like keeps the the heat within him and is able to kind of burn his way into the tribe. And we get a really cool kind of basically two-part fight here between Katara and Zuko. Katara gets the advantage initially because obviously the moon is out in part, not the full moon, and because Zuko's sort of taken aback because her skill level is so much greater than it was the last time like he was in combat with her. And she manages to, it's a fairly like even fight, but Katara clearly has the power advantage here, and ends up kind of pinning him up against the wall. But almost immediately the sun rises because it's been so long, and Zuko gets the advantage, and he says a really cool line of just like, "You rise with the moon, I rise with the sun," and as I said, it's one of the only fights that uses this dynamic, but it's a cool one for sure. That Zuko kind of ends up capturing Aang and basically just walks off with him into the tundra, and it's clear that like when Iroh asked him if he had a plan and he said I'm working on it, he just flat out did not have a plan. He's walking Aang further north to basically the exact North Pole, with no obvious attempt of how he's actually going to get Aang out. And like, it's so cold, and like Aang's kind of unconscious here. Like, he's putting both of them at risk here, and it just shows that like this is how much he's pushing himself to go ahead with this mission. And the idea of like, will Ozai actually welcome him back if he even brings Aang back, or does he just not care anymore, given that he's pushing Zuko to do this much, and is not like, Ozai's not stepping in to even give like Zuko a fair chance to capture the Avatar. He's not like telling Zhao to leave Zuko alone to go on his mission on his own. He's letting Zhao just take over everything Zuko had. Yeah, Aang ends up meditating into the spirit world, which leaves him vulnerable to be captured, and that's when the fight happens. Very interesting in that they very much begin to allude to the fact that there's something special about the two koi fish in the pond, in that it's Aang watching them circle each other that causes him to go into the spirit world. Though we don't yet see the spirit world just yet. That's left for the second part of the episode. So overall, really good setup episode with some really nice action with the start of the battle, the strategic nature of just like, oh, something's going on here with the spirits. They're alluding very heavily to like the moon and ocean spirit, and then Zhao has all this, like, he has an information, he has a plan to deal with the moon, so something big is going to go down, and it's really well set up. Zuko's obviously in danger, but is being pursued basically by like Sokka, Yue, and Katara, and he seems like he's just doesn't have a plan. So big stuff is obviously about to happen, and it speaks to the fact that, like, yeah, part one is more of a setup, but there are some really big moments in it. But a lot of the really, really notable moments, I think, do definitely come in the next part. But yeah, we'll cover episode 20 tomorrow. But yeah, for now, that's been my episode 19 review. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode, as well as what I had to say here in the review. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.